Okay, so I think we are ready to get started. So a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever in the world you are joining us from today. My name is Esme Markham, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar hosted by the Development Cooperation Department of Medrick Water Research as part of its Stabilization Mechanism project. We have a brilliant panel of speakers lined up for you today, and we're delighted to be joined by practitioners from International Alert, Conciliation Resources, Berghoff Foundation, and Medrick, who will all be sharing their insights on monitoring and evaluation in conflict resolution and peacebuilding programming. So before we get started, I would like to quickly direct your attention to a few housekeeping rules that have just been popped into the chat box. And we kindly ask that you observe these rules to ensure that we have a fruitful exchange today. We anticipate that today's webinar will take around 1 hour and a half, with the last half an hour spent on discussion and Q&A. If you do have a question, please use the Q&A chat box function, and please indicate if you would like to direct your question to a specific speaker. I would also like to note that this webinar is being recorded. We will share the recording directly with all attendees, and it will also be made available online. So now I would like to hand over to our Centre Director, Kieran O'Quinn, to say a few words. Sorry, Kieran, you're muted.
I'm muted. I've made the common error. Assalamu alaikum, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. I'm very honoured that we're sharing the platform here today with colleagues from Berghoff, Conciliation Resources and International Alert. I think we need more and more of these professional networks and platforms where organisations in conflict resolution can discuss and share best practice together. And we're all on the same side, and we're all doing our best for peace and conflict resolution in the world. Medrick, for those who don't know what we are or know what we do, and we always say in Medrick, if we're doing our job well, you'll never have heard of us. We are a multilateral international organisation, the last part of the Madrid process in the Middle East peace process. Our mandate is to help the Middle East peace process, number one, and to be a model organisation for states seeking to use transboundary environmental issues in the service of a peace process, number two. Our own journey in monitoring, evaluation and learning is similar to most others. We started off 10 years ago. We've been in existence for 21 years, but when we really started expanding our conflict resolution part, which is the central part of what we do now, we started out essentially with a dialogue to donors, which went something along the lines of, what we do is so sensitive and top secret, you could barely understand what we do. That didn't last very long, and we had to change. And engaging with the whole M&E monitoring, evaluation and learning part, and co-designing programs with governments and with foreign ministries has been really good for us. It's mean we've had to build up the intellectual spine of what we do to develop very, very clear theories of change of what we are and what we aren't, and build out from them. So it's been a really, really fascinating and wonderful journey, really. And actually now in our programs, we almost start with the M&E. We almost start with, how would you start from the end and go, what does success look like? And how do you work back from that in terms of monitoring, evaluation and learning? So I just want to thank our colleagues from Berghoff, Conciliation Resources and International Alert for joining us today. Hopefully between us all, we can do more of these and share these great ideas as we move forward. So thank you very much. And thanks, Esme and Dane for running this.
Thank you so much, Kieran. So now over to our panelists, and I would first like to welcome Alexandra Hernandez, Head of Impact at International Alert. Over to you, please, Alexandra.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm very happy to be having this discussion, as you say, Kieran, and thank you very much for that introduction. So today I'm going to talk about International Alert's approach to impact, and then one of the challenges we face when doing monitoring, evaluation and learning for peacebuilding work. And then I will talk more concretely about how it looks in practice and some of the tools we use. So I will share a very, I think it's only a couple of slides, don't worry. And okay, let me Can you see my screen? Okay, great. So I think all our colleagues here and the people that have joined face the same challenges when working with complex systems. So I think, first of all, like our approach to monitoring, evaluation, and learning is to think about change as in a complex environment, and see change as the redistribution of power. So our starting point for all of the work we do is we do a conflict and gender sensitive analysis that we try to adapt regularly. Then as you all know, we've seen the need with all the different projects that we've implemented and some of the lessons we've captured. We need to capture impact in the aggregate. So that means that we've seen that when we do MEL only at the project level, then because social change, what we do is in the long term, it's very difficult to appreciate like the impact with influence. So we have to do a view of our program of work rather than that per project. However, that's a big challenge because we have to balance the requirements and the priorities of our donors who finance projects in the shorter term. So 1 or 6 months to 5 years, for instance, but what we do is in the long term. So that's one of the first challenges that we have. Then, as you all know, we need to focus on the contribution rather than the attribution. So we are part of a big ecosystems of organizations, civil society actors, other groups that are working in the same area. So what we do from our perspective in terms of MEL is to see what's our added value, how we contribute to that bigger change. And in terms of link to complexity, so as you know, we need to find different ways of doing M&E that are not traditional, so like tools or approaches that we can use more easily in the development sector, for instance, as we work in very volatile situations and context. So we need to be flexible and learn and adapt continuously. And then linked to that is like the need to embrace uncertainty, as I was saying. So one of the key lessons for us as well is that we need to plan, of course, but getting the process and the players matters more than finding the perfect plan, because we know that we'll have to update our plans regularly according to the different changes in the external and the internal context. So very, very briefly, so what does it mean in practice? How do we do it at Alert? So we have a system which objective is, first of all, to understand change, to see how, if we are making a difference or no, and most importantly, to understand how change happens. So to do that, we are looking at the different actors, like who we are influencing and with who we are having an impact. But also we want to see at different types of impact that we're having. So make sense of different wide of outcomes that we try to break down into different categories of changes. And the other thing that we looked in particular, it's like the tactics. So how do we achieve that change? How are we influencing our actors? And we do that, of course, for accountability reasons, as I mentioned before, but for learning and for making sure that we can adapt our plans and inform our future work. But also we do that to strengthen our relationships with partners and help build new ones. So we try to have a participatory approach. So how does that look in practice? So I know I only have 10 minutes. Okay, so we use a combination of tools and approaches. So we have theories of change or influencing strategies. So those are just simply maps that try to establish or list the different actors we work with and for, and how we are going to influence them. Then we have a biannual reflection process. So every 6 months, teams need to, regional and thematic teams have to reflect on their work. And that means mostly, we don't want to make it a very onerous approach, because it's not that every 6 months we are collecting huge changes or outcomes. As I mentioned before, social change takes time, but also we don't want to make it, as I said before, too cumbersome. So we ask for, we use the most significant change tool and ask teams to capture just the 3 most significant changes. Before, sorry, I forgot one step. We ask them to reflect on the external and internal forces and capture just the 3 most important ones, then the 3 most significant changes or outcomes, and then the lessons. And then we have annually, we do an outcome harvesting, which I know Josca is going to tell you more in detail about how they do that at Conciliation Resources. We do that in January. And so these tools, like the theory of change, the biannual reflection process, and the outcome harvesting, are tools that we use for adaptive management. So to inform our strategies. But then we have another set of tools that are tools to engage different stakeholders across the project cycle. So one of the difficulties we find with, for instance, just using one set of tools is that our work is based on the participation of and constant engagement with the people we work with and for. So that means that we need to push for external validation and make sure that the outcomes, the assumptions that we make about our work, our teams make about our work, that they are validated with the people we work with. So for that, because we found the difficulty that some of the teams, when we were doing the outcome harvesting, did not have enough time to think about the short-term and medium-term outcomes beforehand. So we are testing now and using it in some pilot projects, outcome mapping, to make sure that we capture the changes in behavior, and using more broadly most significant change. And then just to say how it looks in practice. So all of that, what we do with that information is we have the country offices analysis. That's based, as I mentioned at the beginning, in a conflict and gender sensitive analysis that's updated regularly. Then we have the program reporting. So that's the analysis that we do per theory of change. And what we want to do now is just to have an approach that will allow us to have maybe not a theory of change for alert. So we'll have a broad and kind of very broad theory of change, but we want to have at least 2 very detailed theories of change for our key areas of work next year. So that will be, next year we'll be developing our next strategy, but most likely they will be around natural resource management and peace economies. So we want to have more detailed theories of change on how we do that, to help teams report against that and see how the different projects implemented at the country level influence or input into the overall theory. And finally, we have our 5 strategic goals. And we do that because just with the analysis that we capture from country offices, we don't have like an overview of the organization as a whole of the region. So that's very briefly the process of how we do it at Alert. I'll be happy to take questions at the end. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alexandra. That's a really, really great way to start the conversation today. And I see a few more people have joined. So please use the Q&A chat box function if you would like to ask a question, and we will come to Q&A at the last half an hour of today's webinar. So I would now like to welcome Yoska Berrios, Head of Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning at Conciliation Resources. Yoska, please go ahead.
Hello, hi, can you hear me? Just double checking. All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much, first of all, for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be presenting our approach for monitoring and evaluation in conciliation resources. And I also have a presentation. Let's see if I can present. That's there now, right? I think it's working. All right. So I don't want to repeat some of the things Alexandra has already said, but just reinforce that when thinking about measuring peace building interventions, our priorities are to look for something that is complexity aware. So understanding that things do not happen in a linear way. So we need to look for systems and models that are flexible enough and that adapt to the kind of programs that we're doing, and also to the volatile environments in which we're working. And the second thing to have in mind is how can we do something that is straightforward and also easier for the people that are doing the monitoring and evaluation. There's not enough resources going to monitoring and evaluation in general, and even less in peace building. So let's put that let's be clear about that. So we need to be very resourceful and make sure that we're using, that we're doing the best use of the resources that we have. Third of all, it can be dangerous for people to collect information and to report some of the information about what we're doing. And some of our partners are working in very difficult environments in which they can't go and do, hundreds of surveys, or asking a lot of people about their opinions and things, because that may be putting them in a vulnerable position. So we also need to think about the safety of the people that are working or that are living in these environments. And finally, we're using monitoring and evaluation to see the impact of our work, to learn from our work, and provide an overview of what works and what doesn't, but not to demonstrate an attribution of absolutely everything that happens on the ground, because demonstrating attribution is very difficult in peace building. So we're more likely to use methods that would help us to see our contribution to the work that we're doing, understanding that there are many actors working on the ground that may influence just as much as we do some of the results that we're seeing. So I just, for everything that I will be talking about right now, I just want to be very clear that we're not saying all of this happens only because of conciliation resources. We're just one more piece in the very huge puzzle that we're working in. So in 2019, CR faced a challenge of how are we going to measure our work and how can we do this more systematically? And looking for the best methods to do this, we identified outcome harvesting to be one that could be suitable for CR. 2019, we started rolling out outcome harvesting through all of our programs. We decided to go all in rather than testing in one program or two. We thought we need to have the data to see if this works in a diversity of contexts. And the only way of doing that is to go all in, do the investment, invest in the training, invest in the team. So we roll it out across all of our programs. That included training all of our staff, training all of our partners, developing online systems so we could store some of the outcomes, making sure that all of the evaluations that we were going to do in the next couple of years would follow similar patterns, so similar methodology of outcome harvesting. And then we also set ourselves to do a midterm evaluation. So that means two and a half years into doing the methodology, we're going to do consultancy to identify whether if this methodology was working for CR and what kind of results we were getting. So we're just done that. And so I'm going to be sharing some of the results of that midterm evaluation with you, as well as a little bit about how we use outcome harvesting. So let me see if I can. Did that change? Does that change? Oh, right, great. Sorry, not used to Zoom as well. I'm used to Google Meet. So yeah, let's see if this works. So outcome harvesting is designed for programs which experience constant change and contend with unexpected and unforeseeable circumstances and factors, which is one of the reasons why we decided to use it. So the way in which it does it is that it collects evidence of what has changed, and rather than, it collects information about what has changed, rather than setting up kind of like preset indicators of what we think is going to change and then just look for that. So that allows us to look at unexpected changes, which, to be honest, are sort of like the majority of the outcomes that we identify. And then once outcomes are identified, we work backwards to determine whether and how the our intervention contributed to those changes. So there it goes. So this is the cycle that we follow. So we start with the design of a theory of change, and we have theories of change at very different levels. So we have an organizational theory of change. Under that, we have programs theories of change that are specific for the context in which we're working, regardless of whether if we have projects in the context right now or not, or where are the kind of the fund strands. So basically, we put in writing what is it that we want to achieve in the place where we're working. And then under that, we have project or like grant specific theories of change, and they all feed to each other. Once that is designed, and this is done collaboratively between like partners and the program staff, we design what we call the harvest or the MEL plan. So this is, all right, what kind of information do we need to collect to verify whether this theory of change works in this space? And what kind of data collection activities we can use to collect the information that we need. So this is very flexible. So in some places, for example, we would have access to talk to some key informants, and then we would do key informants interviews. In some places, we would have access to do focus groups. We do that. When we can do a survey, we do that. When we can only do a phone call or maybe a WhatsApp chat, then we do that, because we really need to be adaptable to what's possible. Then we start implementation. So data collection happens along the way. So we do not stipulate an amount of outcomes that people have to collect. We say it's about quality or quantity. So it's okay if they collect one outcome. It's okay if they collect 100. Doesn't really matter. As long as they collect information about what the program team, the staff, and the people involved in the program considers is important, and that they need to use that information at the end. Once outcomes are collected or identified, they are formulated by program staff or by partners, and they are inputted into our system. So we have an online system that was designed specifically for it. And then the MEL team receives a notification to say that an outcome has been uploaded, and then we do the first verification of the outcome. That means we go through it and we first of all make sure that it's an outcome and not an output, for example. That's kind of like an kind of easy mistake. Making sure that we have all of the information that is required, that the outcome can be verifiable, that and that the outcome is self-explanatory. And then this is sort of like the first tier of analysis. After that, once a year, the program staff alongside the partners and the MEL team chooses the 10 most significant outcomes of the year. And we discuss them in an outcome harvesting workshop, which takes place over 3 days. But it's not 3 full days, it's 3 days, 3 hours each day. So 9 hours in total. And in this workshop, we analyze the outcome, we rate them in terms of significance and contribution. So we have a scoring sheet. And we also add any more relevant information. We see the outcome in relation to the theory of change. So we do the analysis of like whether the outcome is telling us that we're progressing towards our theory of change, or that our theory of change, may need some updating or some changes. And one thing that is important to mention is that in this outcome harvesting workshop, we invite all the program staff, partners, and also critical friends. So we have people that are either from CR, but they're from different programs, who are peace builders and have a lot of knowledge, but they're not involved in the day-to-day implementation of the project, and they can bring a fresh perspective to verify the outcomes. But we can also invite people from outside CR. It can be evaluators, or it can be just interlocutors of the places where we're working, and they can also kind of bring the fresh perspective. And this invitation of critical friends has been one of the elements of our implementation of outcome harvesting that has been the most successful. And the program teams really appreciate it because they really want that kind of fresh perspective to analyze and to be critical about the outcomes and the work that they're doing. So we do this once a year, and implementation continues. It is worth mentioning that throughout the years that we've been doing this, we've identified that once a year was not enough. And at the moment, we're currently doing like mini outcome harvesting workshops in which the MEL team supports the program staff to brainstorm outcomes and help them in a workshop style to do the to elaborate the outcomes or formulate the outcomes as well. So that's also been very useful. Once projects or grants get to an end, we continue to do external evaluations, but with the only difference that we suggest to evaluators that they use a similar methodology, and that they use some bank of data that we have, and they can verify it or substantiate it. They don't only have to use that data, they can collect more data if they consider they don't have enough information. That is up to the external evaluator to say. But at least we make sure that some of the information is already there for them. Okay, so what does the information look like? So this is sort of like what the information looks like. So here you can see, for example, the actors and the type of change. So for example, we can see that in terms of like attitudes, we've been more successful in changing the attitudes of members of civil society organizations and citizens. And in terms of relationship, we've been mostly working in the relationships of between community leaders, government representatives, and citizens. So it kind of helps us to know, where we're going as an organization, because this is the aggregation of all of our outcomes across all of CR, so not just kind of like a program level. Here is another example. So we can see the type of change in relation to our gender and inclusion indicators. So we can see, for example, that for our programs focused on women, peace, and security, we have been more successful in achieving outcomes in relation to changes in relationship, and less so, for example, in changes in agenda. So that's sort of like expected, because obviously it's harder to change an agenda than to change a relationship. But it's sort of like a way that can help shape then our programs in the future and say, all right, how can we focus in the areas where we have less outcomes? In, for example, broader inclusion, we can see as well that most of our changes now are in relation to changes in relationship, but also in relation to changes in attitudes. So I'm just showing this to demonstrate like what the kind of data look like. So now this is done using a bank of outcomes. So since 2019, we have collected over 500 outcomes. So that really helps us to kind of like have some real data that will give us some kind of key information. So in terms of what the information or the data looks like qualitatively, so this is an example. So using the example of Northeast Nigeria, we in group or in the outcome harvesting workshop, we developed impact statements. So these are two of the impact statements that we developed based on the outcomes that we have identified. So the first one is that in the last year, the program supported contributed to a decrease of violence in the communities where we work and an increased respect of human rights. And the second one is applying a gender-sensitive lens to the reintegration processes has resulted in more inclusive peace-building results. So these are the top line impact statements. But then what we see is under each impact statement, we have a list of outcomes that support provide evidence to that impact statement. So here, for example, for the first one, we have 3 outcomes, and this is just an example, but 3 outcomes that support that impact statement. And first one is security actors increasingly acting upon or responding to information and reports by youth and the wider community. Vigilante members reported greater respect of human rights during their operations, and people looking to defect from Boko Haram and IS in order to join rehabilitation reconciliation processes have done it more in the places where we work than in communities where we don't have a presence. Underneath each one of these outcomes, there is also kind of more information that will tell you how many people have reintegrated in these areas, how did we kind of find out this information, what worked well to achieve this, what didn't work before that we tried but didn't work till now, where this change happened, who was involved, etc. So it's kind of layers of information that you kind of start peeling depending on who you're presenting the information to, right, and how much detail you need to present. We've conducted a midterm review. So for the midterm review, we hired a group of consultants. They looked over, I think by the time that we started the consultancy, we had over 400, but we hadn't reached the 500 outcomes yet. So they looked at all of the outcomes. They did interviews with staff. They did interviews with partners. And they also looked at all the evaluations external evaluations conducted over the period of 2.5 years. And they were looking at 2 things. One of them was CR has a set of goals that kind of guide our strategy. So one of the things that we're looking at is how our goals were still relevant and how was the progress of CRs towards achieving those goals. So we have results on that, but that's not relevant to this conversation at the moment. But the outcomes allowed us to look at that, the data allowed us to look at that and do that analysis. And the other part of the evaluation was to look at whether if the model that we're using there for outcome harvesting was appropriate for CR. So the results were that there's a positive, that outcome harvesting is made a positive difference to CR ability to identify and learn from its achievements. And they identified reasons for it. One is that outcome harvesting recognizes the complexity of the areas where we work. It empowers CR partners and project staff to identify what counts as outcomes within the context in which they work. It ensures that all teams carve time to reflect in a meaningful way. So that's something that is very difficult in peace building because we're constantly reacting and we're working like really fast paced. So making sure that people, regardless of whether we have funds for it or not, the fact that they will always have these outcome harvesting workshops, it really kind of helps them to carve the time to put it in, their diaries and make sure that that meaningful reflection happens. It provides a safe and constructive space. And the critical friends was also kind of brought as one of kind of the key elements of it. It supports the analysis of progress against like program level theories of change. So we were able to look beyond the kind of like normal, one-off intervention that is what usually happens with just, external evaluations at the end of each grant. So being able to kind of do this, across programs. Provides the rich body of information for analysis like the one that they were doing. And the fact that some donors welcome the use of outcome harvesting was also seen as something positive. However, the fact that not all of them do and that we need to do more advocating for it was seen as something that needs to change. Now, it wouldn't be honest of me to present all the positives without telling you also what they thought that we need to improve. So I'll do that as well. First, what has worked well, and then the challenging part. So the things that work well, that internal commitment and investment is high in outcome harvesting in CR, and it was this was something that was very obvious for the evaluators. The trust and openness foster a culture of self-analysis and support. The diverse skills of the critical friends, having theories of change at all these levels was something that they found very beneficial. Upon equal participation. So partners, they also collect outcomes, they participate in the analysis, they which is very different than what is often done, unfortunately, which is that partners collect information and then the analysis is done like in headquarters. This involves everyone at all the different levels. And everyone participating needs to have a basic understanding. So the fact that everyone was confident enough to participate was something that they found as useful. So things that we should improve was identify ways in which outcome harvesting can support learning reflection across organizations. So, and one of the ways that we're responding to that is by identifying themes and clustering outcomes in relation to themes rather than just regions or programs. Strengthening the focus on learning reflection. So prompting more and more about negative outcomes. So that's hard. And that's something that they also found even in the evaluations, which were sometimes done with more linear methodologies, is always harder to find negative outcomes. So trying to kind of put more focus on that and ensuring that we're contributing or we're finding information in relation to policy change, because policies take so long to change, so that we were able to find outcomes about the progress. And that's it. How do I stop sharing? So, yeah, those were the results of the evaluation. So overall, we can say that the methodology is fit for purpose, and it has improved CR's ability to measure change and to reflect about the change. There are some improvements that needs to be done, and we'll be working on that, specifically on the thematic analysis part of that. However, we're happy to continue to use outcome harvesting, and we'll be very soon well, not so soon, but in the next year, publishing more information about how other organizations can adopt a similar approach and what the benefits of it are. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Joska. That was some really useful and interesting insights there. So I'd now like to turn to Andreas Scherdel, Monitoring and Evaluation Advisor at Berghoff Foundation. Over to you, please, Andreas.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Esme, also for the invitation and for bringing us together. So it's a great opportunity to exchange and learn from each other. And I'm just trying to share my presentation. So, okay. Are you seeing it full screen now? Wonderful, excellent. Great, so I'll be structuring the presentation into two parts. The first one is also a bit more conceptual, trying to describe a little bit the approach to MEL that we have at Berghoff. I'm leaving the design part out, so everything related to developing theories of change and conflict analysis is being left out at the moment. So it's more about methodologies and approaches to monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And then the second part, which is probably a bit more interesting for the audience also, is much more practical. So I'm presenting a tool, a practical monitoring and learning tool, a digital and participatory monitoring and learning tool, which we're currently using in 2 projects, but that we're planning to expand and also use in other contexts. So with that, just as a brief overview, for those of you who don't know the Berghoff Foundation, we have quite a broad portfolio of approaches and projects and methodologies. We do mediation, negotiation, dialogue support on different tracks, like on a higher political level, but also on a very local level. We also have a research department. We have peace education projects and also do trainings in various contexts. And I'm telling you all of this just to illustrate that it's kind of difficult to develop a Berghoff approach to MEL. So different projects, different methodologies that we use and also require different approaches to monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So this is also the reason why we currently are focusing on 4 different approaches that are also listed here. The first one is outcome harvesting, that I don't think I need to present in much more detail because we've already heard a lot about it today. We sometimes combine it, or like the validation process is kind of an inherent part of the outcome harvesting. We sometimes, but it's also, I feel it's also kind of quite costly and time intensive. So when we validate the outcomes, we focus just on a very few outcomes, like when we identify a very tangible success stories that we think we have significantly or that we have contributed to, we then focus just on those and try to reconstruct the chain of events that have led to that outcome by doing interviews with people that were involved in the process, just for us as a learning opportunity. The second approach is also the one that's more demanded now by donors as well, is impact evaluation or rigorous impact evaluation. We do this or plan to do this whenever it's possible. It oftentimes isn't possible in the kind of work that we do. We can do it for projects, for larger projects, or for projects with large sample sizes, so to speak. We can only do it when it's politically and also ethically acceptable to have some sort of an experimental design, and for example, to have a control group to, in addition to kind of the treatment group, which is a very technical term, apologies. But so these are conditions that need to be given to do a rigorous impact evaluation. And also a third condition is kind of the outcomes. Joschka mentioned it before, it needs to be very measurable, very tangible outcomes, and data needs to be collected quite easily, or we need to have the possibility to collect data on those outcomes. And we only can apply this rigorous impact evaluation approach, for example, in our peace education project. Could also use it for like dialogue support projects, but only on the very local level, but definitely not on this high level mediation support work that we sometimes do at Berghof. For those kinds of projects, the third methodology is much more useful. That's a methodology that's used or has been developed at the HD Center in Geneva by Ian Wedley. It's peer review, and it's much more focused on adaptation and learning. It's not so much like the retrospective analysis of data that we've collected, but it's more forward-looking, making good decisions along the way in a very volatile and changing and dynamic context where everything that happened before might not be relevant anymore, or not as relevant as we think. So and how it works is that whenever the project team is kind of faced with an important question or a challenge or a change in the context, it kind of brings in a new perspective or new perspectives by external peers that are not working in the project, also not working for the organization, to bring in this outside perspective to make better decisions, to overcome kind of this professional bias that we always develop when we work in the same context, in the same team for a very long time. So to bring in this fresh perspectives to kind of make good decisions along the way. And the fourth methodology then is storytelling, which is also what I'm going to present in a bit. It's basically about making visible or making use of like personal perceptions and stories, and also to learn how those that are affected by the conflict that perceive the work that we do, and to also make the impact of our work, if there is any more tangible and more visible. So these are the methodologies that we're trying to mainstream throughout the organization, and we follow some sort of a decentralized approach we call the champions, MEL champions. So we try to provide trainings and capacity building measures to project managers working at Berghof. We have MEL advisors at Berghof. I'm one of them, but we can only come into the different projects at various points in time. But really to make sure that this expertise is also anchored in the teams, we try to build those capacities through trainings and other measures. Okay, so this was the first part. Let me now move to the next slide, which is a bit more practical, the next part of the presentation, which is a bit more practical, and to give you a bit of background on the context. We've been working in Somalia, especially in the state of Hirshabelle, for a number of years now, and we're working with a local network, the Insider Peacebuilders Network, the IPN, which is a group of around 50 local peace builders across the state of Hirshabelle. And what we do is we provide trainings and capacity building measures to the IPN members, so to strengthen kind of their ability to address conflicts in their communities and to act as mediators in their communities, and also to strengthen the communication and coordination with the local administration, exactly for the purpose of establishing them as kind of local mediators in local conflicts. In the last project period, we introduced, or the colleagues introduced, a digital participatory networking and monitoring tool, which uses this geographic information system software, GIS software, and story maps software. And how it works is that IPN members can share their experience of their work as local mediators. And they can do this by submitting stories, like written stories, also images, audio files, videos, or video interviews. They can also do this anonymously. And each submission includes information about how and where they acted as mediators. And this is then georeferenced data, or these georeferenced experiences and anecdotes are then integrated into a map that I'm going to show you in a bit. That map is part of a wider networking tool. And it's displayed online, so the IPN members can access it online. There is also a public version that all of you can access as well, but it's much more limited in terms of what it displays for obvious reasons. But generally, it's just a digital interaction space. IPN members can view and share and visualize their peacebuilding experience, and ideally then also encourage each other and inspire each other and learn from each other. So it's the idea of kind of building a collective of peace builders across the state of Hirschabelle. So it's not just a monitoring tool, it's also a networking tool and a learning tool. Let me just show you a screenshot what it looks like. So this is the website, and here you see on the right, you see the map of Hirschabelle. You have dots here on the right side that you can click on, and here on the left, you see the respective stories or interviews or images of that experience of the IPN members that they submitted themselves, wrote themselves, or recorded themselves. And this is just a publicly available version. The protected and encoded version is much more extensive, but it can only be accessed by the IPN members. And here you see a bit more content of what it looks like. Okay, so, and to finish with, let me go to the next slide, a bit on the advantages of that tool. I think it has a very high level of autonomy, so it increases the ownership of the data collection process. It's not an evaluator or us traveling and doing interviews. It's basically the IPN members themselves submit the data and their stories. It also, I feel, has an increased incentive due to this dual use component. It's not just a monitoring tool for kind of the donor or for the project implementer, but it's also for the IPN members a digital space to exchange, to learn from each other, and to network across the entire state. And finally, it's just, I feel like it's kind of a great way to monitor and to visualize, and also to showcase the work that they do, the IPN members do, in a non-technical and accessible and also easy to understand way. But obviously it also comes with a couple of challenges. First one, probably most important one, is this that I mentioned, the one that I mentioned before, kind of the security, accessibility, or security inclusivity trade-off. So, which is also the reason why we've created this separate encoded map for the IPN members only. And then the second one is kind of a bias, or like the IPN members acting as gatekeepers of what they are willing to share, which I think is the case of with all data collection tools. So with also, if you conduct interviews, that would be the same thing. But it is prone to a certain bias. And then there are technical barriers. So the workload to get used to the tool, to working with the tool, at least, especially at the beginning, is still quite high, and it needs or requires a kind of initial investment to set up the tool, to develop the tool, to instruct everybody to use it. But that comes with a decreasing marginal cost, so to say. So, which is also the reason why we're trying to expand the use of that tool and also use it in other projects in the future. And with that, I'm handing back to Agnes.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Andreas. And I would now like to welcome Danae Smith, Program Manager in the Development Cooperation Department at MEDRIC. Over to you, please, Danae.
Thank you so much, Esme. So a lot of what I would like to discuss today from MEDRIC's point of view overlaps with a lot of what has already been shared. However, there is a little bit of I think, a difference in terms of how things are structured at the broader stroke of things. Can everyone see the slides okay and hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So essentially at MEDRIC, MEDRIC's mandates direct the scale and scope of its program activities. And the theory of change that is used is an institutional one. So instead of a more project-based one. The majority of the donors that we have, especially those funding the Development Cooperation Program, are also member states to the organization and are already committed to MEDRIC's mandate and institutional theory of change, which plays a big role in how monitoring and evaluation and learning processes can be implemented and directed and also reflected upon. So the MAL systems have been developed across the organization rather than by donor-led requirements. Project-specific indicators reflect project activities and allow for donor requirements to be met. For example, some donors have an emphasis on technical water capacity, whereas others are more focused on water diplomacy. Indicators are developed sometimes using a SMART approach to allow for the different priorities to be met whilst remaining in support of the core mandates of the organization. But it is important to note that the core mandates prevent the development of indicators that reach beyond its organizational capacity. So quite often with SMART indicators, when they're used to inform, or when SMART is used to inform indicators, we often have the issue of perhaps overreaching indicators or not encompassing indicators, or developing indicators that are encompassing enough, particularly in conflict resolution and peace-building settings. So in the MEDRIC instance, having mandates that are very specific and that streamline activities has been helpful in that regard, although of course limiting in other regards. In line with the broader organizational strategy, disaggregated data is collected along gender, area location, and age parameters. This disaggregated data feeds back into elements like gender mainstreaming strategy, as well as political economic analysis of programs, both in the short term and the long term. So it's narrow, but very resilient framework means that MEDRIC's Development Cooperation Department does not have dedicated staff who focus solely on monitoring, evaluation, learning, which is quite different to the other cases presented so far. Instead, program managers are responsible for monitoring, evaluation, learning activities as part of their work streams, and independent consultants are employed periodically. Now, of course, this brings in challenges such as bias, as Andreas mentioned, but it also allows for a sense of continuity that can often be helpful in programming. Given the top-down systemic implementation and integration of monitoring and evaluation indicators, streamlining malpractices within the team has been possible in the case of MEDRIC and its Development Cooperation Department, but this may not be scalable beyond narrow mandates and objectives. So that's something that's quite an interesting point of contention and conversation, particularly in the broader M&E conversations. So as has already been touched upon by everybody, conflict resolution programming is incredibly challenging, in particular from an M&E perspective. And as Yaska mentioned, there's very little resources that can be called upon that demonstrate like substantial trials and tribulations being advanced or surpassed. So in the sense of MEDRIC's Development Cooperation Department, a lot of it is a stop-start it's stop-start nature programming, which is predominantly reliant on the external political and security environment in which the programs take place. This can be challenging from a donor perspective, as the programs are often high risk and externalities which the project has no control over present significant challenges in implementation. And in the case of MEDRIC, this has been indeed a limitation as it relates to the external environment of the Middle East peace process. The very nature of the programming work that MEDRIC focuses on is to ensure that resilient relationship building is cultivated. It's key, and this can be difficult to ascertain from a monitoring and evaluation point of view because of the many stops and starts, and also just inherent interpretation that comes with that. So ongoing communication and feedback to donors is and has become very clearly vital to mitigate such risk. Consistency in data availability and documentation, however, as well as cyclical evaluation and baseline assessments are challenging to shape and build on, given that relational dynamics, particularly in conflict settings, are complex and ever-changing. And so there's this leaning that happens on external consultants that have proved particularly key in creating innovative solutions and ideas to ongoing challenges, much like what Joachim mentioned, the critical friends that are invited in to help to bring fresh perspectives to the space, which is something that's a bit of a new initiative to MEDRIC, but one that we are looking forward to exploring further. So in an attempt to confront some of these challenges, MEDRIC's Development Cooperation Department has looked at developing a centralized database system that's solely in-house. This has been mainly because, as already mentioned, you can't just openly share information without repercussions, and sensitivity to the information is important to maintain, but also an internal learning log that extends from the institutional theory of change matrix is reflected upon every quarter. Now, this is quite frequent, but it's mainly because it's a new system in place, and to have that kind of institutional memory that becomes used and put into place has been identified as important. And also there's been a focus on trying to add indicators that allow for longer term systemic analysis of program activities. So one of the more specific program or monitoring approaches that has been used is the social dialogue approach. And it's a scalable approach to monitor and evaluate specifically relational dynamics between core party participants. So it's very much related to dialogue support. And in its institutional framework, all MEDRIC countries are joint owners, joint guarantors, and co-equal partners. So in measuring or attempting to collect data around that relational space is important. The entire form and function of MEDRIC relies on generating goodwill among all core party members and voluntary willingness to be part of the multilateral process that it facilitates. And so the social dialogue approach framework allows for a scalable assessment of relational dynamics over time. It regards dimensions such as the extent to which participants take an equally active role in encounters, the state of intergroup interactions and atmosphere that they take place in, but also in terms of considering relationship changes and behaviors. The social dialogue approach has been helpful for particularly monitoring, not necessarily so much for evaluation and learning, mainly because of the time that is still needed for it to be reflected upon with constructive thought. Conducting monitoring using the social dialogue approach in isolation is problematic, particularly if it's in isolation from broader program objectives. So this would not be something that is used without having a clear institutional theory of change that works towards an outcome that's targeted, because you risk becoming a solution looking for a problem as opposed to actually trying to scale relational dynamics. Some of the new initiatives, so this is one example of some of the new initiatives that we have found to be helpful in maintaining trust and relational scope with core parties, but also being able to kind of look at exactly what Joska mentioned earlier, where contribution is helpful and where the kind of the boundaries of attribution versus contribution lie. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's been pretty much it from Medric's new initiatives. But I look forward to engaging further in discussion with the audience and hearing more of an exchange, because as we can all agree on, this is a space that needs a lot more knowledge as a base and progress. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Danae. And I would like to thank all of our panelists once again for sharing their insights and experiences. So before we move to Q&A, I would like to quickly ask our panelists if they have any comments, reflections, or questions that you have for one another based on what's just been shared. So whoever would like to go first, please just unmute yourself. Pressure's on.
So I would love to hear a little bit more. Joska, you mentioned that the program that you use was specifically designed for the outcome harvesting. May I ask what that program is, or was it an in-house built program for information and data sensitivity reasons? Could you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, it's a platform that it's called Podio, but the way in which we design Podio, because Podio is sort of like an open platform, like and then you design it so it works for you. The way we designed it was to adapt to outcome harvesting, but it is also because it's not just mail for us. We do mail, we do program tracking, we do a little bit of everything in it to try to make sure that all the systems are kind of streamlined. So we did have to kind of hire some consultants for them to design something tailored for our organization, which took us about a year to get it done properly. And in terms of confidentiality, yes, it's completely safe. So only people that works in CR would have access to look at the data. However, our partners are able to input data into Podio.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
So any other reflections, comments, or questions from our panelists? If not, we'll move on to Q&A from the audience. Okay, nodding heads for Q&A. So Q&A it is. To our audience, please use the Q&A chat function, or please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question live. We have a question from David Michel. David, if you'd like to, please go ahead and ask your question live if you would like to.
Hi, am I on?
Yes, you are.
Okay,
David.
great. So my name is David Mickel. I work with the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, and my question is directed to all of the panelists and takes off from some of the more challenging elements of the mail process that many of you mentioned, that it's resource intensive, time consuming, that it can be dangerous, difficult to collect the information, and then many of the ingredients are subject to continuing complexity, uncertainty. Harvesting the results and registering them necessarily looks at long time horizons and unanticipated outcomes. And all of these elements, as some of you mentioned, can be problematic for funders in terms of advocating for these processes, presenting their results, continuity from project to program to institution. So I would just like to ask you if you could elaborate or discuss some of the challenges and maybe some of the successes of designing, developing, and implementing these processes with or maybe without the support of funders.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. And Joska, I'll hand over to you.
I'm sure my colleagues will have a lot more to say, but just to get started, definitely there are challenges. And I think that this kind of spaces, and we do have a couple of spaces where male practitioners come and talk to, members of donor organizations to tell them, what our challenges are and, the rigorous data that the kind of processes that we're using do give us are important. And we do have a couple of these spaces. I think that those are very important, but also the fact that, if you listen to international law, the Berger Foundation, we're all saying something similar. And I think that the fact that we're all synced, the fact that we're all saying, look, this is what you can have, really works for donors, because you don't have someone actually making fake promises and saying, yes, we're going to give you all the data, it's easy, we'll do this, when we know that it is not true, right? So the fact that there is sort of like, similarities coming from all different organizations, I do think that helps. Another thing that we've done is try to get donors involved in all the different stages of the planning process. And we've had, for example, sometimes when we're designing a log frame alongside some of our donor people, that they say, for example, we need indicators to be a little bit, stronger, or we need indicators to be this way or another. And what we do is really take the time to explain why indicators can't be in the way that they want, what we actually can do, and then be very transparent with our information. And for example, inviting donors to our outcome harvesting workshops, giving them more information than the one that they actually, request. So then they see that we are, doing our work, regardless of whether they ask it or not. I think that gives them a sense of security that we take our monitoring and evaluation very seriously, and that that we do it. And then finally, I think that we have a couple of allies within the donor organizations, a lot of people that do know what sort of monitoring and evaluation techniques work, what the challenges are. And it's very important to maintain a really close relationship with these people who are very influential within their kind of donor organizations, and try to get them involved with the kind of data that's coming out of our spaces, and the kind of insights that we're getting, and, helping them to shape a little bit of the thinking within the donor organizations. I think it's a long process, and we still have a long way to go with some donors more than with others. But I think that the more time that we can invest, and this usually kind of lies in, like, my colleagues that are here, for example, we keep bumping each other in this kind of spaces, but the more that we can do that and give the time to explain all of these challenges, is the best that we can do.
Thanks, Joska. And Alexandra, would you like to comment on this?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I completely agree with Joska. So we have some champions, but in terms of donors, but with the others, in terms that the ones that are where we have more challenges, I think we have some leverage to influence them. But in terms of the challenges, I think is in terms of the short-term kind of mentality and the linear reporting. So we have, for instance, at Alert, and I think at most of the organizations, we have these approaches and tools for measuring complexity, but at the same time, in most cases, we have to compromise and use log frames, for instance. So that's something that's a big challenge, because while we try to do something more like spend more time in reflection, look at what works, what doesn't, how can we use that information to inform decision making, we still have to comply to that type of monitoring. So short term means that for some country staff and for some partners, they tend to maybe focus more on activities rather than impact. So that's a challenge from that. And also that means that we'll have to, as I mentioned before, we have to balance like the donors kind of theories of change or priorities with our own theory of change. So that doesn't encourage that much thinking about a negative impact where we collect like lots of valuable information. And so I think in terms of yes, another challenge from there as well is that we are dealing with complexity. So it doesn't help if we are dealing with very complex and intricate reporting procedures. Now, so we've seen that as a kind of a double reporting, as another burden for staff, and resources are quite limited, and we prefer to use the limited resources to think more about how we can advance our work than to think in the shorter term. And then some donors still use some, and not some are way ahead of our thinking and our guide as well our thinking, but use as well like some complex language. Some use different language, so that's why we're thinking as impact as any change, negative or positive, expected or unexpected, that happened as a result of our contribution. And also because otherwise we'll have like lots of different terms for goals, results, impact, well, I mean lots. So that's another kind of difficulty. In terms of you say, like, just to say something of the positives, I think we've learned that simplicity encourages flexibility and inclusion. So using tools as outcome mapping, where we are asking simple questions about what do we expect will happen as a result of implementing the project, expect like love, that works very well because it's easily understandable by everyone. And also by thinking in terms of how we want actors to change and how we want to influence them, that we have a progress markers there. So it's like these simple tools work quite well. And just to finalize with that, I think still like it's great, as Jojoska said, that we are talking about the same issues and that I think all of us can influence the sector. Okay, thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alexandra. And Andreas, please go ahead.
Thanks. Not much to add from my side, really, but I also share this sentiment. It always is a challenge, but I also feel like there are a number of donors who understand the problem, who are willing or open to alternative ways. But yeah, but then again, it's always difficult. I mean, you always need to distinguish between the individual that you're talking to and the institution or the institutional processes that are behind it that are much harder to overcome or to be changed. But at the same time, I also feel that as a field, we also need to get better at communicating our impact, not just as individual organizations, but maybe as a field by, let's say, developing a code of conduct or best practices together. And also to no longer hide behind that argument that we always make and that I've read in so many articles on impact evaluation in peace building or conflict transformation. This is like, well, because of the non-linearity and the complexity of peace processes, it's impossible to capture our impact. I think there are creative and good ways to do that. It's very challenging, but we should never stop trying out different things and also engage or just to be creative and try different ways and methodologies out, because I think it can be possible.
Thanks, Andreas. And Kieran, I'll turn to you. Sorry, Kieran, muted.
There we go. I'm okay now. I think one of the big mistakes people make is, an organization will go with the wrong donor. And in the conflict resolution world, if you go with a donor and they're funding you through a mechanism which they usually fund, blankets for refugee camps or something, the program will fail, and it will always fail because you can't do what they want you to do. And people together end up reverse engineering the file and backfilling a file to make things look okay at the end. But you actually, in our experience, when we've gone with traditional development cooperation donors, it's been okay. But when you go to a donor who has an expertise in stabilization and conflict resolution, it's an absolute dream, and it's so easy. And within, one meeting, you can actually agree, okay, here's what we want the outcomes and the outputs from this project to be. It'll be over 3 years, it'll be over 5 years, and then you negotiate back from that. It's very, very easy. I think it's really, really important that, in addition to organizations like ours talking to each other, that there's spaces for organizations like ours and donors to talk, because there's a lot of movement required on both sides. But my main point is, all of us have wasted a lot of time down the years working with donors who have tried to sort of bolt on conflict resolution onto traditional development cooperation funding, and it really just doesn't work. And it's a total waste of time for everybody. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Kieran. And David, I'd like to invite you. I don't know if you want to comment on anything that you've heard.
No, thanks. That was brilliant. I appreciate the perspectives from the different organizations, and particularly the points about creative methodologies and creative partnering and spaces to pursue those objectives. Because I think that we have to recognize that complexity and nonlinearity are evident not only in the project and program space, but also in the actor and implementer and donor space. And we need to be as creative and transparent in working with our funders and organizational stakeholders as we are as working with the participants and the partners in the programs that we're undertaking. Thanks so much.
Thanks, David. And Alexandra, you have your hand up.
Sorry, yes. Just very briefly on what was mentioned before, just that I didn't mention with regards to what some of the panelists mentioned about the peer review and all of that. I think there's great potential, as we know, for learning with all the tools that we use. And also I want to say, like, for instance, at Alert, we started last year having like not peer reviews, but different regions facilitating the sessions. So the biannual reflections, the annual reporting, the annual planning for other regions and teams. And that has been a great kind of learning exercise. So in terms of how to work and kind of engage different regions from the organization, that has been quite useful. So I think taking into account the limited resources that we have, I think there are some ways of finding kind of spaces for learning. And the other thing as well, in terms of linking like the M&E with the learning and being able to close the loop as well, is like to have, for instance, we have lots of communities of practice within Alert, and lots of brown bag events, etc. But there are too many, and the participation is not that useful sometimes. So I think we have now like a very targeted learning agenda, where we decided, we voted on, okay, so we cannot get and improve everything we do. So maybe just choose 1 or 2 areas of work where we can improve and learn. So so I think that has been quite useful as well in terms of how we do M&E and learn from that.
Thank you, Alexandra. So to our audience members, if you have any other questions, please do raise your virtual hand or pop your question into the Q&A chat box. Alexandra, again, is that your hand raised or a legacy hand?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
I mean, I'm taking the time. Just a question for Andreas, because our team in Kenya, they use a tool called ONA. So I wanted to know if you are familiar with that tool and if it's similar with the software you described.
I have to admit, I haven't heard of ONA so far, but I can also talk to our colleagues in the Somalia team to ask them. The tool that I just presented, that was developed purely on the basis of two existing softwares, the GIS, like the Geographic Information System software, and Story Maps. But I would have to ask the colleagues if they know the other tool or if that has also been used. I can't give you an informed answer to that question.
Okay, thank you, because it seems it's similar to ONA, and we would like, for now, we only have the Kenya team that has been using that tool for years now, and we would like to kind of test that tool with other teams, and it's free. But so it would be great to maybe I will look into that tool and compare and see how they both interact. Thank you.
Let's do that bilaterally afterwards. That would be great.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, that's great to see. I think it's the MNEM world can be quite, obviously challenging and complex environments, but I think creativity is needed, but also collaboration and communication among all of the wonderful actors that have developed some amazing systems and processes. So it's amazing to see some bilateral collaboration taking place here today. So if there are no other questions, I will open up again to our panelists. If there's any kind of final thoughts, final reflections that you would like to share. No? Okay, brilliant. Well, I think we can end it there. So thank you once again to all of our panelists, and thank you to you, our audience, for joining us today. And as I mentioned earlier, the webinar is being recorded. We will share the recording in the coming weeks, and we will also share kind of a webinar brief, just summarizing the key takeaways from today. So thank you all so much, and we look forward to welcoming you in future webinars.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.